I welcome our next speaker, Dr. Ann Chappelle. She brings deep expertise in toxicology and risk assessment, and she'll help us grapple with one of the toughest challenges we face, explaining concepts like dose, risk, safety thresholds to an audience primed to fear the word chemical.
You guys have a lot different allergies going on up here, so excuse me for that. Hi. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I've heard that Michigan is cold. I don't see where that is happening, so maybe I should have done my postdoc here. So I want to tell you about kind of how I got here. First of all, I went to the University of Delaware, go fighting blue hens, came out with a biology degree, did not get into graduate school right away, but luckily my friends worked down the street at DuPont Haskell Laboratory for industrial medicine and toxicology. And there I did a co-op for a year looking at deposition of chemicals in the nasal cavity. And my boss, Matt Bogdanfy, took me aside after a few months and said, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" And I said, "I want your job." And he said, "Okay." So we worked out a deal where I worked at I went to school at the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science and got a Ph.D. in pharmacology and toxicology, but I was lucky enough to work in his laboratory down at DuPont. So I kind of lived in the middle and kind of had the best of both worlds. After I left PCP, which is of course the best name for a pharmacy school, it became the University of the Sciences, and then it became St. Joseph's University. So I don't know what to put on my CV. I knew I wanted to go right into industry, so I ended up not taking that postdoc with Jay, actually, and going to work for ICI in their polyurethanes division. Then we were acquired by Huntsman Chemical, and so my portfolio of chemicals and things that I had to keep track of just kind of kept growing and changing a little bit. And things were going great at Huntsman until they said, move to Texas and find a new job. So I started working for Roman Haas Chemicals, and that was a great opportunity, but not the perfect fit. So again, same kinds of things, managing chemical portfolios, making sure that they're safe for not a lot of food, but mostly consumer products, chemicals, workers. And then I worked for Sunoco Chemical. You may not have heard about Sunoco Chemical because they sold all of their chemical businesses and downsized me into just now having gasoline. So from there I said, what am I going to do? 2 little kids, a husband with a career job near my family. So I do what a lot of people do, is hang up their own shingle. So luckily, because so many people had left all of these other companies, I had a ready base of people that I could help. And that was great, but it was also hard. You know, anybody here who's done consulting knows that if you're not hustling for your next piece of work, you are not going to work next. So when the opportunity came along for me to work for the International Isocyanate Institute, or III, I took that, and I was helping them to manage their health issues for this global scientific trade association. That was great, allowed a good balance for family. I got to see some really awesome places around the world. But along comes COVID, and I had to do a reassessment to say, what did I really want to do? You don't renovate your kitchen right before you sell your house. So if I had about 10 years left to work, where was I going to go and make a difference? And that turned out to be Trinity Consultants, SafeBridge. So many of you have not heard of us because it's more of an environmental consulting company, but it has this tox arm. And I originally joined them in the pharmaceutical area. But then there was some changes, and now I manage the Tox Reg group, and I'll go into that in a minute. And so why do I tell you in such glory detail about all of my chemical experience here? It's because everything changes. And during your career, you need to capitalize on existing opportunities to expand and adapt. And that is something really important. This idea of getting all of these spices, these unique experiences, and put them in your pantry so that you can have a fulfilling career as well as address a lot of different questions. I never thought I was going to end up interested in food other than on my plate, and look at me now. So in my group, we are toxicologists, regulatory professionals. We're small but mighty. And I just wanted to show that there's a lot of different things that we have been doing over the years. And this kind of culminates into, again, saying, who's your audience? Who are you trying to speak to? Am I trying to speak to a regulator? Am I trying to speak to someone in the community, or a worker, or the business head who says, I don't want to spend $350,000 on a 90-day oral study? So again, part of my skill set is figuring out how to tell people what they want to hear and what they don't want to hear. And that is a very important skill to continue to develop. Why did you do something is just as important as why you did not do something. Why you asked a particular question is just as important as all the questions you didn't ask. So just remember that when you are trying to look at a whole series of questions. Who's your audience? And again, this is the basic stuff about public communication and science communication, but it's easy for us to kind of get lost. One of the ways that I try to communicate to people is to use analogies to translate complex science. And here are two examples here. One is the 1 part per trillion, where it's just a drop in an Olympic-sized pool. Or you can use this roadmap as an example on how arteries switch and divide. The trick is finding the right balance between being scientifically accurate and the ease of understanding for your particular audience. If it's too simple, you're going to obscure important details and lead to this false sense of understanding. And when that analogy breaks down, you create a lot of chaos and lasting incorrect associations. And the analogy only works if the source concept is familiar to the audience. So do not go around talking to people in the US and extrapolating your main theory to cricket. That would work in the UK. That would work in India. But if you're in the US, you got to talk baseball. So again, really think about who are you talking to and what analogy, what commonality is really going to be able to help communicate that thought. Part also is building trust with your audience. Okay, and those are the 3 C's, the credibility, clarity, and connection. So again, these are basic things that I think we all understand fundamentally, that these are all really important. Being transparent, using a plain language. I'm not going to read them all to you. I will be happy to send these to you in your inbox. Leverage your trusted messengers. Tell the story of science. Make it into something that they can understand with a beginning, a middle, an end. So honestly, how many people here have read the MAHA report? Okay. It only takes you a couple minutes, actually. It's very quick reading. There's lots of big pictures, and there's not text even that goes down to the bottom of the page. But let's apply this theory on being transparent and building trust to MAHA, which I guess that's how you pronounce it. So first of all, I talked about being transparent. Well, that's pretty transparent. We want to make America healthy. Okay. Using plain language. They had a lot of buzzwords in there. There were a lot of simple words, lots of graphs and pictures, many colors. Showing independence. Government scientists are good, industry bad. Okay, we are government, we are good. Engaging respectfully. There's no real clear blame in there except how evil industry is, and that was, kind of subtle. They repeated their message over all 73 pages, multiple times. They leveraged the trusted, right? CDC, NIH, all these alphabet soups. some of them that don't really exist anymore. They demonstrated integrity. They referenced data. They talked about an altruistic goal. And let's not just talk about the data that they made up in AI, but they did reference data. There were 300, 400 references listed at the bottom on the page, not associated actually with the text. And then they told the story of the science, visualized the data, used references. So fundamentally, they were following the rules, the very important rules that we all have to follow. But as we continue to dig a little deeper, that's where the questions come. Healthy children make healthy adults. It's an iceberg because the key points that they talked underneath were all about sedentary lifestyle, corporate influence, cronyism. That was really funny. That's putting people in power that don't deserve to be in power. That was hilarious. My point is that I think at the surface, we can all agree that these are admirable goals, that we do want to get rid of more environmental toxins, and we should be moving more. But it's the message that below it, that it took us some time, and that we as scientists really were saying, this is not making sense. This is not with what I understand. So preparing for this talk, I found it very interesting about trust in science and when that actually backfires. And we saw a lot of this in social research, psychology research around COVID with all of those truths and speculations. In this paper, participants who trust science are more likely to believe and disseminate false claims that contain scientific references than false claims that do not. Well, because it's referenced. It's got to be right. Reminding participants of the value of critical evaluation reduces belief in false claims, where reminders of the value in trusting science do not. Trust in science, although desirable in many ways, makes people vulnerable to pseudoscience. It's kind of a double-edged sword, don't you think? We want them to believe science. We tell them, we give them facts, and we give them just enough for them to not believe the facts or find something else that maybe more aligns with their goals. And those facts are also referenced, so they must be of the same quality and value. So how do you sway the unswayable? So this talk kind of goes a little bit beyond kind of just talking about risk and dose. But I think that understanding some of these points really will help us to target the right messages. Building common ground. That's so important when you have somebody who doesn't trust what you say, that is a non-believer. And how do you build common ground? Active listening. You ask open-ended questions. Where did you find that information from? What was your education? How did you grow up? Cultivating empathy, really understanding where they're coming from. You cannot build common ground until you find it. Where do your goals align? Where do you cross over? I have a child on the autism spectrum. That is an easy way to connect with other moms, dads, parents, and find ways for us to talk about issues together. You need to be prepared, do your research, find some form of compromise. Again, build that common ground. And in one of the greatest tools that I've found, and although I did find this kind of recently, is this concept of intellectual humility. Is that familiar to anybody? Have anybody heard that term? Okay, a couple. Awesome. So intellectual humility is the recognition of your intellectual limitations and acknowledgement your belief, ideas, knowledge could be wrong or incomplete, unless you're a teenager. A willingness to revise your viewpoints in light of new evidence, a mindset focused on discovering truth rather than intellectual superiority. That's a big point. and an openness to other people's perspectives. So in this lovely cartoon, which I have referenced, and you can double check that, we have a scale really going between stubbornness and being completely gullible. And where you really want to be as a scientist is somewhere in the middle. You want to be able to say, you know what, I'm willing to change my mind. I'm willing to see something from your particular viewpoint. Show me the evidence. Let's talk about it. And that is intellectual humility. So again, it's awareness of your cognitive limitations, owning your biases, understanding that you may not know the whole story. You need to be open to revision. You can change your mind. We're scientists. We're allowed to. We're supposed to. Low concern for intellectual domination. You don't want to show how smart you are. You want to learn what they have to say, understand where they're coming from, and focus on the truth. Orientation towards discovery of truth. It's not about winning the argument or upholding your personal belief. What is it not? It doesn't mean you don't care or you have a lack of conviction. You can hold strong beliefs, but those beliefs might be fallible. It doesn't mean you're not confident. It's a calibration of your confidence in trying to find the truth and willing to say that maybe you should change your mind. And it's not general humility. It's different. It's really about your beliefs, your ideas, and intellectual stances. It's distinct from modesty. So when I was looking around and I found this quote, originally attributed to Carl Sagan, which when I did my research, it was not. But basically, it's keep an open mind. You must, but not so open that your brains actually fall out. So what I wanted to really stress today to you, and I hope I've done this, and more than happy to talk more afterwards, especially over a glass of wine. So file all these experiences that you get and put them into your toxicological pantry, as I call it. Use all of those ingredients and experiences to make the best dish for your dinner guest. Find where those can go. Take them out. Don't always make spaghetti and meatballs, people. Make something creative sometimes. Use all of those things that you've taken enough consideration to pull into your memory, to pull into your practice of how you do your science, so you can use it again. Be creative about explaining your science. Make it personal. Once again, the use of analogies to communicate your complex topics. My mom loves these, and your mom and your grandmother will love them too. So will the regulators. So will that first-year graduate student who's trying to figure out what lab to go into. Again, build trust with your audience, the credibility, the clarity, making a connection, finding your common ground, add a roadblock, build a bridge. Be willing to step back. Be willing to go back and learn more about that issue so that you can come back and be prepared and maybe revise your view. And in terms of intellectual humility, practice what you preach. Be open for new ideas. So a chemical really is just anything, right? It can be part of a food. And that was funny in Maha. It talked about synthetic chemicals, which always kind of gets me going a little bit, versus natural chemicals. Yeah, they're all the same thing, yeah. But this idea of, how do we take this information, dig a little deeper, and be able to say, you know what, I read this report. It's got some fundamental ideas that make sense. So let's dig down to really what is the motivation behind the report, who does it benefit, who does it not, because it is a much more complex issue. Of course, we can't really get into that necessarily right away or with certain people, but we can be open and we can listen. Investigate for yourself some of these topics. This concept of intellectual humility is relatively new. And I think it's got a lot of place for us when we are trying to get someone to see our viewpoint. So I've been doing, this kind of chemistry and working with all different kinds of people, global, regional, all these different companies, from the woman in the laboratory who's scared because she's pregnant but she hasn't told her boss yet and she's worried about the chemicals that she's worried about or that she's working with, to the CEO of a company who said, I don't sell into Europe, why do I need to comply with REACH? All of these different situations are fundamentally the same. Building your bridge, finding out what their driver is, and give them a way to make it relatable. That's how you handle risk. Understand the risk by understanding the nature of the chemical and the exposure, and continue to build those same types of arguments with all the things you do. Yes, what are these? These ultra-high processed foods, they're really risky. But if your exposure is small, then you understand the chemical hazard of it, which we really don't, then your risk is small. So again, be simple, be direct, be consistent. And when you explain something to your family or to a grad student, and they can explain back to you what you said, then you are sure you really are able to communicate that issue. Because if you can't communicate it to them, if they can't understand, then you've missed one of your most important audiences. So take a look at some of these. I'm around today and tomorrow. Thank you again for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
All right, we have time for a couple of clarifying questions, if anybody has one.
Come on, hit me.
If not, they'll save it for the panel discussion at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ann.